Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the European Commission's massive August 2026 CBAM guidance package. Look, if you're dealing with cross-border trade into Europe, the landscape hasn't just shifted a little bit, it has been fundamentally rewritten. We're going to break down exactly what this immense regulatory update means for your daily operations, your compliance strategy, and ultimately, your bottom line.
But before we even get into the weeds, you really need to ask yourself this critical question. Because the definitive phase of the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, is officially here, and the stakes have literally never been higher. For the past couple of years, companies kind of enjoyed this transitional grace period, right? It was a time to just figure things out, test the waters, and get comfortable with the whole idea of carbon reporting. Well, that safety net is gone. The regulations are fully maturing, and compliance is now a strict, non-negotiable requirement for doing business in Europe.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the 2026 CBAM update, look at the new supply chain reality, dive into the industries under the microscope, tackle the verification mandate, and wrap up with your strategic next steps. Let's jump right into Section 1, the 2026 CBAM update, specifically focusing on that crucial August 14th guidance.
To truly grasp the gravity of this update, we really have to look at what was happening before August 14th. During the transitional phase, there was just widespread ambiguity. Compliance teams were, frankly, panicking. Nobody was entirely sure how the European Union was actually going to enforce these massive carbon mandates on foreign soil. And then, the European Commission dropped 10 sweeping new guidance documents. 10 of them. While the core regulation hasn't changed, these documents provide the definitive rulebook. They totally wipe out the gray areas, they detail rigorous, uncompromising emissions monitoring rules, incredibly specific calculation methodologies, and strict implementation guidelines tailored directly for non-EU producers, importers, and third-party verifiers. It completely shifts us from a period of guesswork into a reality of strict black and white rules. Without a doubt, this is the most important development since the definitive period started.
The message from the Commission here is loud and clear. This is not a practice run anymore. It is a definitive business mandate. Think about what being baked into your core operations actually means in the real world. In the past, carbon reporting was kind of just this annual backward-looking chore. You'd hand a spreadsheet to a sustainability officer in December, let them crunch some estimates, check a box, and call it a day, right? Well, operating like that now will result in massive penalties. Today, carbon data has to be tracked in real time. It needs to be fully integrated with your ERP systems, your procurement processes, and your factory floor management. If you export to Europe, carbon transparency simply cannot be a side project anymore.
Moving on to Section 2, a supply chain reality and what this new business era actually looks like. Think about the contrast in mindsets here. The old way of thinking assumed this was just some pesky paperwork for the customs department to handle. Just another tariff code to punch in at the border. But that mindset is totally dead. The new reality is that CBAM is a full-blown supply chain issue. It's a fundamental change in how global trade works. We're talking about a procurement issue, a deep sustainability issue, and, increasingly, a really complex technology issue. You aren't just managing the physical flow of goods across a border anymore. You're managing a massive, continuous flow of carbon data. And guess what? If that data flow stops, or if it's deemed inaccurate, the physical flow of your goods stops right along with it.
The stakes become incredibly obvious when you look at the domino effect happening inside the European market right now. Institutional investors are demanding way stronger, more rigorous environmental disclosures from European parent companies. So the boards of those companies feel the heat, and they turn around and put immense pressure on their chief procurement officers. And where did those procurement teams look? Directly at you, the supplier. They are heavily scrutinizing your transparency to meet their own strict disclosure demands. This creates a very immediate, practical threat for you. If you don't have structured, verified, well-documented emissions data, European buyers are not going to waste time holding your hand to figure it out. They'll just drop you and find a competitor who already has the data ready to go.
All right, Section 3, Industries under the microscope. Let's see exactly who is in the crosshairs here.
We're looking at 6 major carbon-intensive sectors, and each one faces completely unique, strict expectations for data. Let's group the heavy hitters first: steel, cement, and aluminum. Steel is under massive scrutiny because of its huge global footprint. In the steel market, your verified data is basically your new price tag. It's absolutely critical for staying competitive. For cement, which is one of the most carbon-intensive industries on Earth, accurate data is literally your license to keep selling in Europe. Aluminum buyers are aggressively comparing suppliers based entirely on environmental performance, so having rock-solid accounting is a huge differentiator. Then we have the highly technical, future-focused sectors: hydrogen, fertilizers, and electricity. For hydrogen, the cornerstone of industrial decarbonization, precise monitoring is vital to justify high-stakes investments. Fertilizer manufacturers are dealing with intense scrutiny, where deeply documented reporting is an absolute must. And finally, electricity imports demand incredibly consistent accounting just to ensure fair comparability across totally different regions.
Which brings us to Section 4, the verification mandate. Honestly, the era of estimates is officially over.
I cannot stress this enough. You literally cannot just guess anymore. Your emissions data must now be meticulously proven, audited, and internally controlled. The definitive CBAM period relies strictly on verified emissions information. That means no more extrapolating and absolutely no using general industry averages. Because if you do try to just use generic averages, you're looking at severe financial risk. The European Union will apply what they call punitive default values. Basically, they'll assume the absolute worst-case scenario for your specific emissions, slap you with massive carbon fees, and effectively price your product right out of the European market. You need robust monitoring systems and crystal-clear documentation to protect your margins.
So, to avoid an absolute compliance disaster in future reporting cycles, you need to operationalize these 4 steps immediately. Monitor accurately, document every single process, verify the info robustly, and report the data. Let's look at a quick hypothetical to see why you can't skip a beat here. Imagine a supplier who spends a fortune on state-of-the-art sensors to monitor their emissions perfectly. Great, right? But they skip step 2. They fail to thoroughly document the methodology of how that data was actually collected. So, when the third-party verifier shows up to audit them for step 3, they can't verify the data trail. Because the documentation is missing, the whole data set gets rejected. Boom! The supplier's shipments are blocked at the border, or they get hit with astronomical non-compliance fees. You just can't skip a step. Documentation is the glue holding this whole pipeline together. And let's be real for a second. Because the documentation is getting so incredibly detailed, adopting AI and digital carbon platforms isn't just a nice-to-have anymore. It's an absolute necessity. This isn't about adding some fancy new software to your tech stack. It's about sheer volume and scale. Under this new guidance, the amount of data required by CBAM is staggering. You're tracking direct emissions, indirect emissions, and complex precursors across multiple facilities, 24/7. Human spreadsheets are simply going to snap under the weight of this compliance load. Human error will inevitably creep in. AI is a real game changer here, because it automates that massive data collection, spots anomalies way before a third-party auditor flags them, and drastically improves your reporting accuracy. Relying on manual data entry today? That's a massive operational vulnerability.
All right, final section. Section 5, Strategic Next Steps. How do we actually prepare for the future?
So what exactly should you be doing right this second? Here is your tactical checklist, drawn straight from the Commission's guidance. Think of it as a 3-part attack plan. First, look inward. Lock down your internal data immediately by strengthening your emissions monitoring systems and tightening up your overall data governance. Second, look outward. You can't do this in a silo. You have to engage your own upstream suppliers, demand transparency from them, and get them fully on board with these strict new rules. And finally, look forward. Future-proof your operations. Get ready for those third-party verification audits now. Evaluate AI-enabled carbon accounting tools, and build out long-term sustainability reporting capabilities that can actually scale as these regulations inevitably expand.
Look, you can view this as a massive regulatory headache, or you can treat it as a strategic business transformation. Honestly, the companies that are going to absolutely dominate the next decade of international trade are the ones who view this level of transparency as an opportunity to lead. Think about it. If these requirements are this difficult for you, they are just as difficult for your competitors. The businesses that act right now to build these sophisticated monitoring and verification systems are going to turn compliance into a formidable competitive moat. They'll be the ones successfully outcompeting everyone else for lucrative European contracts because they'll simply be the safest, most transparent partners to do business with.
So, as you plan your strategies to win in this new, highly regulated, carbon-conscious global economy, consider this reality. We are way past asking if carbon transparency matters. It is purely about how fast you can adapt and execute. So, I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. Will your carbon data hold you back and become a barrier to entry? Or will it be the ultimate competitive advantage that pushes you ahead of the entire market? Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and best of luck navigating the definitive phase of CBAM.